Hi, I'm Daniel, and today I want to share with you some note-taking techniques and strategies which I've used over the years to good effect in hopes that they will help you to take better notes on things that you're reading. So by the end of this video, I will have shared 2 types of note-taking and then 1 technique for each type of note-taking, so that by the end of this video, you should be able to take better and more effective notes on things that you're reading. So the first thing I want to point out before I actually share with you these 2 types of note-taking and their techniques is that when you're reading something, you can address different levels of focus. So for instance, you could write a summary on a book, which is a really broad level of focus if you're thinking of the book as a whole, right? Next, you could focus on a chapter, which would be a more intermediate level of focus. And then finally, you have a passage or a sentence, which would be the most specific level of focus. Now, the reason I point this out is because it's a good thing to keep in mind as you're reading that really good notes will address each of these 3 levels of focus. And the reason I say this is because if you're not careful, you can either take notes that are way too general to be a lot of use for certain cases, for certain use cases, or you could take notes that are so specific that you forget what the main arguments are in a book. And so just as a reminder up front, that there are these 3 levels of focus which you can address effectively in your notes just by writing summaries for maybe what the book is about, what the chapter is about, and I will come back to that point here at the end. But first, let's talk about the two different types of note-taking. So you can take notes for understanding and you can take notes for information. Now, in this first type of note-taking for understanding, this is where I should say corresponds to reading that we're doing, again, for formation, for development of some kind, where we're trying to formulate ideas. And so we're reading things in order to do that. So because that's the goal in this case, the kinds of note-taking we're doing will be different. And so what's really important for this type of note-taking is reflection. The notes that you take should be notes that allow you to reflect. So this is what I do when I'm doing this kind of note-taking. At the end of a chapter or a section, whatever whatever makes the most sense based on the length of the chapter or the section, I will pause and I'll force myself in my notes to say at least one intelligent thing about the thing that I've read. And lately, what that means, because I've been doing a lot of research in mathematics, and I'm reading some math treatises which can be really dry, and it can be difficult to keep your mind engaged after reading proposition after proposition after proposition. So what I force myself to do is at the end of every proposition, I'll sit down with my notebook and I'll write out at least one intelligent thing on every proposition that I read. So I'll come to the end of the proposition and I'll ask myself, okay, well, what was interesting that was here, right? What can I write down? How can I respond to what I've read in some kind of a meaningful way? Now, this does take time, but it's a really good way of not only recording your own thoughts, but also forcing you to think them in the first place, which is an easy thing not to do when you're reading. It's easy to just zone out and to absorb without actually responding. And the other danger of simply absorbing without responding, of course, is that you won't actually process the information nearly as well. And so by forcing myself to respond periodically to what I'm reading by saying something in response, not only do I stay more engaged, but I understand the material far better. And it also helps that I have a set of notes at the end of this, which help me to go back and revisit my thoughts that I had as I was reading. So that's the first type of note-taking, right? Notes for understanding or development. Now, the second type of notes are notes for information. And so this is best suited for things like research projects. If you're working on a research paper or something, this is really the kind of notes that you're usually taking. And what's needed here really is indexing. This is what you should be doing. So what do I mean by indexing? Well, what I mean is, as you're reading, of course, you should be making notes or marks in the book as you're reading, right? If it's not a library book, obviously. You don't want to deface library property. But you should be making marks. In my case, it's usually vertical marks in the margins, because I don't like underlining things, but that's just personal preference. So I'll make all these little vertical marks in the margins of my books. And sometimes I'll even write little notes and stuff in the margins as well. But then after I do that, at the end of a chapter or at the end of a section, I'll sit down and I will index. And so I'll go marking by marking, and I'll write down the page number. And then I'll say in a few words what was significant on that page that I thought was worth marking. So this way, at the end of a book, I have amassed my own personal index, linking me to everything that I thought was important in the book. And this is extremely valuable. If you've ever written a research paper, you've probably had the experience where you're writing the paper and then somewhere in the middle of it, you realize that there was this fact or this quote that would be perfect for a particular paragraph. And so then you start frantically looking through your books, trying to find this quote again, and you can't find it. And half an hour goes by and you still haven't found it. And you're sure it was in this one book, but you can't find it. So writing a personal index will keep that from happening as frequently, because now you will have given yourself not just a little page number, but also a little marker of some kind, or just with a few words to link back to that thing that you're probably going to need later, right? And so the other benefit of this too is that it does also make for pretty effective review. If you need to go back and review what was in a chapter, you can often just skim down the index and see, summarized in a couple words at a time, everything that was important to you in that chapter. And that's really nice to be able to do that. So one other thing we can do, though, in order to address the different levels of focus to make our personal index even better, is above your index, before you start writing the index, you can write a chapter summary. And that way you have a broad context in which to read all of your very specific notes. I will also say really quickly that there's no reason why you can't intermix note types, right? There's no reason why you can't intermix reflections with these other notes for information in your index. I do this all the time. So I'm not saying that these two note-taking types need to be kept separate. I'm just saying that they're two different types of note-taking, and you can often combine them to really good effect. So those are my tips and strategies for better note-taking, especially as regards note-taking on things that you're reading. Because it's really important, of course, to be reading with a pencil in hand for maximum comprehension and retention. Responsive reading is really what we're after, and I think taking notes in either of these forms or either of these types of notes is a really effective way of doing the kind of responsive reading which will serve you best. So I hope that helps, and we'll see you in the next one.